You may have lost weight before. Maybe the scale went down. Maybe your clothes felt looser. Maybe people even told you, "You look great." But let me ask you something uncomfortable. Have you ever lost weight and still felt tired? Still inflamed? Still foggy? Still stuck? Because if that's you, then this video is not about willpower, and it's not about calories. It's about something you've probably never seen and were never taught to care about. Visceral fat. Not the fat you can pinch. Not the fat you see in the mirror, but the deep, hidden fat wrapped around your liver, heart, pancreas, and intestines. This fat doesn't just sit there. It talks. And for years, it's been whispering the wrong instructions to your body. Here's the part most people don't realize. Visceral fat is not passive storage. It behaves like an endocrine organ. It releases inflammatory signals. It interferes with insulin. It distorts hunger. It drains energy. And most dangerously, it convinces you that your body is broken, so you push harder. You eat less. You exercise more. And the harder you push, the louder the resistance becomes. That's not failure. That's biology. Because when visceral fat is present, your body is not trying to change. It's trying to protect itself. Think of your body like a city. Subcutaneous fat, the kind under your skin, lives in the suburbs. It's slow to respond, hard to reach. But visceral fat, that lives in the capital, right next to the decision makers, right next to major blood vessels, right next to hormone control centers. So when something shifts even slightly, visceral fat hears it first. And this is where the story changes. Because when your body senses an energy shortage, from fasting, from skipping constant snacking, from finally letting insulin drop, a quiet message gets sent. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a biochemical signal that says, "We don't have excess coming in. Unlock the deep reserves." And visceral fat responds immediately. It begins to break apart, releasing fatty acids into the bloodstream. But these aren't just calories. They're messages. They tell your liver, your muscles, your heart, your pancreas, new plan. Stop running on sugar. We're switching fuel. That single shift triggers a chain reaction. Your liver starts upgrading its machinery. Your muscles become more efficient. Your pancreas eases its grip on insulin. And while you're sitting there, maybe a little hungry, maybe a little uncomfortable, inside you, a quiet metabolic revolution begins. This is why visceral fat loss feels different. It's not dramatic. It's not flashy, but it's foundational. Because when visceral fat starts to melt, the body doesn't just get lighter, it gets calmer. Let's talk hormones. For years, visceral fat keeps cortisol, your stress hormone, elevated. Your nervous system stays on alert. Your immune system stays irritated. Sleep stays shallow. But as that fat recedes, inflammation cools. Cortisol begins to drop, not forced, not suppressed, but naturally. And people notice something strange. They sleep better. They wake up clearer. They feel less reactive, not because life changed, but because the background noise finally quieted. Then comes insulin. As visceral fat shrinks, insulin sensitivity improves. Cells stop resisting. Blood sugar stabilizes. Cravings lose their grip, not through discipline, but through restored communication. And then there's leptin, the hormone that tells your brain you're full. When visceral fat dominates, leptin's signal gets ignored. You eat, and never feel satisfied. But when that fat decreases, leptin gets its voice back. Hunger becomes honest, not urgent, not panicked, just clear. And at the center of all this, the liver, the first organ to receive the flood of fatty acids. At first, it's challenged, but the liver doesn't collapse. It adapts. It increases fat-burning enzymes. It begins producing ketones, a cleaner, more stable fuel. It clears hormones more efficiently. This is why so many people report clearer thinking, steadier mood, and sustained energy during proper fasting. Not because they're pushing through. Any 100 said, but because their metabolism is finally working with them, and we're just getting started. Now, let's talk about what happens next. Because once visceral fat starts to break down, the spotlight moves to one organ above all others: the liver. If your body were a factory, the liver would be the processing plant. Everything passes through it: fuel, hormones, toxins, waste. And when visceral fat melts, the liver is the first to feel it. At first, it's overwhelmed. A sudden flood of fatty acids arrives. Signals change. Fuel priorities shift. But here's the part most people get wrong. The liver doesn't fail. It adapts. Quietly, efficiently. It increases fat-burning enzymes. It upregulates pathways for fatty acid oxidation. And it begins producing ketones, a cleaner, more stable energy source, especially for the brain. This is not starvation. This is metabolic restructuring. And as the liver adapts, something remarkable happens. Its other jobs start working better too. Detoxification improves. Blood sugar regulation stabilizes. Hormone processing becomes more efficient. Estrogen, cortisol, testosterone, they stop backing up in circulation. They stop sending mixed signals. This is why so many people report something unexpected during proper fasting or visceral fat loss. Not just weight loss, but clearer skin, more emotional stability, sharper focus. Not because they're doing something extreme, but because their liver finally has breathing room. Now, let's address something important and often misunderstood. If you've ever started fasting or changing your metabolism and felt worse before you felt better, this is why. Visceral fat is not just fat. It's a storage site. Over years, your body uses fat, especially visceral fat, to lock away things it can't eliminate right away. Environmental toxins, pesticides, heavy metals, chemical additives, not because your body is careless, but because it's smart. Fat is safer than letting these substances circulate freely. But when visceral fat breaks down, those stored substances are released. And suddenly, your liver, kidneys, and lymphatic system have a lot of cleaning to do. So some people experience fatigue, temporary brain fog, digestive discomfort, mood swings. This doesn't mean something is wrong. It means cleanup is happening. Think of it like cleaning out a cluttered garage. At first, everything gets messier. Boxes everywhere. Dust in the air. But that chaos is temporary. And on the other side of it, the system runs cleaner than it has in years. Now here's where the story gets even more interesting. As inflammation drops and toxic load decreases, another system begins to recover. The gut. Visceral fat is a major source of chronic, low-grade inflammation, like a quiet fire that never fully goes out. It irritates tissues, disrupts immunity, alters the gut environment. When that fire cools, the gut becomes more hospitable. Beneficial bacteria like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium begin to repopulate. And these microbes do more than digest food. They produce neurotransmitters. They regulate immune responses. They influence mood. In fact, up to 90% of serotonin, the neurotransmitter linked to calm, well-being, and sleep, is produced in the gut. So when the gut heals, the brain feels it. This is the gut-brain axis in action. Less gut inflammation means fewer stress signals sent to the brain, which means better sleep, more emotional resilience, clearer thinking. This is why so many people say, I don't just feel lighter in my body, I feel lighter in my head. And this is where we need to pause and correct a common misconception. These changes are not placebo. They are not willpower. They are biological consequences of removing a chronic stressor. Now let's zoom out, because once inflammation drops, hormones rebalance, the liver adapts, and the gut recovers. The body enters a new phase. Scientists call it metabolic flexibility. This is the ability to switch smoothly between fuel sources. Glucose when it's available, fat when it's not, ketones when needed. Most modern bodies have lost this ability. They rely almost exclusively on sugar and panic when it's gone. But when visceral fat is reduced, that flexibility begins to return. Energy stops crashing. Hunger becomes predictable. You no longer feel trapped by constant fueling. Your mitochondria, the power plants inside your cells, begin producing energy more efficiently, more ATP, less oxidative stress. The result? Sustained energy. No sugar crashes. Less reliance on caffeine. And here's a subtle but powerful shift that many people don't expect. Once visceral fat is reduced, it becomes easier to lose subcutaneous fat, the stubborn fat under the skin. Not because you're trying harder, but because hormonal signaling is no longer blocked. Insulin sensitivity improves. Adiponectin increases. Fat-burning pathways stay active. Your body stops fighting you. And this is the turning point. Because at this stage, weight loss is no longer the main story. Function is, your body is no longer stuck in emergency mode. It trusts its environment again. And when the body feels safe, it stops hoarding. Now, let's talk about what this shift really protects. Because visceral fat doesn't just affect how you look. It threatens the systems that keep you alive. The heart, the blood vessels, the pancreas. When visceral fat is present, insulin resistance quietly builds. Cells stop listening. The pancreas compensates. Insulin rises higher and higher just to keep blood sugar stable. This works for a while, until it doesn't. That's how prediabetes begins. Not with sugar, but with signaling failure. And visceral fat sits right in the middle of it. It releases inflammatory molecules that interfere with insulin receptors. It floods the liver with fatty acids, forcing glucose production when it's not needed. It keeps the pancreas under constant pressure. But when visceral fat begins to recede, this pressure eases. Insulin sensitivity improves, not dramatically, but meaningfully. Blood sugar stabilizes. The pancreas breathes again. And this is where many people notice something subtle but powerful. They stop feeling on edge between meals. No sudden crashes. No shaky urgency. No panic hunger. Because blood sugar is no longer swinging wildly behind the scenes. Now let's talk about the heart. Visceral fat doesn't just store energy. It alters cholesterol balance. It increases LDL, the kind more likely to form plaque. It suppresses HDL, the kind that clears it. It also promotes inflammation inside blood vessels. Think of it like roughening the inside of a pipe. Over time, plaque sticks more easily. Blood pressure rises. The heart has to work harder. But here's the part that rarely gets emphasized. You don't need to lose massive amounts of weight to change this. Even modest reductions in visceral fat produce outsized benefits. Studies show that losing just a small percentage of visceral fat can significantly lower cardiovascular risk. Because again, this fat isn't passive, it's active. And removing it changes the conversation entirely. As inflammation drops, blood vessels relax. Nitric oxide production improves. Circulation becomes smoother. Blood pressure stabilizes. People often describe this as, I don't feel as tight. My chest feels lighter. My heart rate feels calmer. Not dramatic, but protective. Now, let's move deeper into hormones. Visceral fat disrupts hormonal signaling at every level. Leptin, ghrelin, adiponectin. When visceral fat dominates, leptin resistance sets in. The brain stops hearing the signal that says enough, so you eat past fullness. Not because you lack discipline, but because the message never arrived. As visceral fat decreases, leptin sensitivity begins to recover. The brain hears the signal again. Satiety returns quietly. You stop when you're done, not when you're stuffed. At the same time, ghrelin, the hunger hormone, stabilizes. No more random spikes. No more false alarms. Hunger becomes rhythmic, predictable. And then there's adiponectin. This is the hormone that visceral fat suppresses most aggressively. Adiponectin increases fat burning, improves insulin sensitivity, protects blood vessels. When visceral fat retreats, adiponectin rises. And when it rises, metabolism becomes smoother. This is the hormonal harmony people feel, even if they can't name it. Now we reach a critical turning point. Because once inflammation is down, hormones are rebalanced, and fuel usage is flexible. The body stops focusing on survival and shifts toward repair, This is where autophagy comes in. Autophagy is your body's internal recycling system. It breaks down damaged proteins, clears dysfunctional cell parts, removes metabolic debris. For years, chronic feeding and constant insulin suppress this process. There's no pause, no cleanup window. But when visceral fat melts and insulin drops, autophagy reactivates. Quietly, cells begin housekeeping. Mitochondria get refurbished. Inflammatory proteins get cleared. Tissues recover integrity. People often notice better skin, faster recovery, less stiffness, more resilience. Not because they're biohacking, but because repair finally has space. Now, let's talk about something even deeper. Your biological set point. For years, your body may have been defending a higher level of visceral fat, not out of stubbornness, out of fear, chronic stress, constant sugar, poor sleep. These conditions tell the body the environment is unsafe. And when the environment feels unsafe, the body stores. But as visceral fat decreases, inflammation lowers, sleep improves, and blood sugar stabilizes, the nervous system begins to shift. The autonomic balance between fight or flight and rest and digest recalibrates. The body no longer feels under siege. And when that happens, the set point changes. Your body stops rebuilding the same fat, not because you're forcing it, but because it no longer feels necessary. This is why sustainable fat loss doesn't feel aggressive. It feels natural. You're not fighting appetite. You're not chasing energy. You're not micromanaging every decision. Your biology is finally on your side. And that brings us to the most important realization of all. Losing visceral fat isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning of a different relationship with your body, one based on trust. And this is where everything comes together. Because after all, the science, all the hormones, all the pathways and mechanisms, there's one truth that matters more than anything else. You were never broken. Your body was never lazy. Your metabolism was never weak. Your willpower was never the problem. What failed was the environment. An environment of constant stimulation, constant sugar, constant stress, constant eating, constant noise. Your body adapted to survive that. And visceral fat was part of that adaptation. Not a mistake. Not a moral failure. A biological response to perceived danger. When food never stops coming in, when stress never turns off, when sleep is shallow and fragmented, the body does the only thing it knows how to do. It protects. It stores. It buffers. It insulates vital organs with energy and inflammation control. Visceral fat became your body's emergency bunker. And for a while, it worked, until the cost became too high. Chronic inflammation, hormonal confusion, fatigue that no rest could fix. A body that felt like it was fighting you. But here's the shift that changes everything. When you remove the constant pressure, the constant input, the constant demand, the body doesn't need to be forced. It remembers. It remembers how to regulate hunger, how to balance energy, how to repair itself. This is why real transformation doesn't feel aggressive. It feels relieving. People often expect fat loss to feel like punishment, hunger, suffering, endless discipline. But visceral fat loss, when done right, feels different. It feels like finally exhaling, finally sleeping, finally thinking clearly, finally trusting your body again. And this is where many people miss the point. The goal was never to be thin. The goal was to be free. Free from constant cravings. Free from blood sugar crashes. Free from fear around food. Free from the belief that your body is fragile. When visceral fat melts, your relationship with food changes. You stop eating to manage emotions. You stop eating to avoid crashes. You stop eating out of fear. You eat because it nourishes you. And when you're not eating, you're not panicking, because your body knows how to switch gears. That's metabolic freedom. And it doesn't come from hacks. It doesn't come from extremes. It comes from restoring rhythm, periods of nourishment, periods of rest, periods of fasting, periods of movement. Contrast. This is how the human body evolved. Not in constant abundance, not in constant deprivation, but in cycles. And once your body feels those cycles again, it stops hoarding. Because hoarding is what happens when the future feels uncertain. Now let me be clear about something important. This is not about never eating carbs. This is not about starving yourself. This is not about punishment disguised as discipline. It's about giving your biology space. Space to lower insulin. Space to reduce inflammation. Space to repair. Space to reset its expectations. And when that happens, something profound changes. You stop managing your body and start cooperating with it. You don't wake up thinking about food. You don't spend all day negotiating hunger. You don't end the night feeling guilty. You live. And your body handles the rest. This is why so many people describe this phase as a quiet upgrade. No fireworks. No dramatic before and after photos. Just stability. Energy that lasts. Mood that holds. Focus that doesn't collapse at 3 p.m. And the most surprising part? You stop obsessing about health. Because health stops demanding your attention. Your systems are no longer screaming for help. They're working. And this brings us to the final truth. Losing visceral fat is not about aesthetics. It's about reclaiming your biological agency. It's about moving from a body that is constantly reacting to one that is responding. From survival mode to maintenance mode. From chaos to coherence. And the moment you understand this, you stop fearing your body. You stop trying to control it. You listen to it. And it responds. So if this video resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in this story, know this. Your body wants to heal. It always has. It was just waiting for the right conditions. And if you want more content like this, science-based, honest, and grounded in how the human body actually works, consider subscribing. Not for motivation, not for hype, but for understanding. Because when you understand your biology, you don't have to fight it. You can finally work with it. Before you go, I want to leave you with one quiet thought. Most people spend their lives trying to control their bodies. Control hunger, control weight, control cravings, control energy. And the harder they try to control, the more out of control everything feels. But what if the problem was never a lack of control? What if it was a lack of understanding? Because once you understand what visceral fat actually is, once you see it not as a personal failure, but as a biological signal, something shifts. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What has my body been responding to all this time?" That question changes everything. It replaces shame with curiosity, punishment with patience, force with cooperation. And that's the moment real change begins. Not when you push harder, but when you listen more closely. So if there's one takeaway from this entire video, let it be this. Your body is not the enemy. It has been adapting intelligently to the signals it was given. Change the signals, and the response changes too. Less inflammation, clearer hormones, more stable energy, a metabolism that works with you instead of against you. And none of that requires perfection. It doesn't require extreme diets. It doesn't require endless discipline. It doesn't require you to hate yourself into health. It requires rhythm. It requires space. It requires trust. If you've watched this far, you're not just curious. You're paying attention. And that tells me you care about understanding your body, not fighting it. So here's what I'd love for you to do next. In the comments, tell me one thing you recognized in yourself while watching this video. Was it the constant fatigue? The stubborn belly fat? The cravings that never made sense? The feeling that your body was always on edge? You don't need to explain everything. Just one sentence. Because when people share honestly, others realize they're not alone. And that matters. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing. Not because we post hacks, not because we promise shortcuts, but because this channel is about understanding the body the way it actually works, through biology, not blame. And if you want to go deeper, check the next videos on the screen. We'll talk about how fasting affects hormones long term, what really happens when you quit sugar, and how metabolic flexibility changes aging from the inside out. Thank you for spending this time with me. Your body has been waiting a long time for this conversation.